Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we turn our attention to the idea of human nature. Our first reading is Xunzi's Human Nature is Evil, a 3rd century BC text of classical Chinese Confucian origins. Our second reading is an introductory excerpt of al-Farabi's Political Regime, a classical text of Islamic philosophy from the 10th century. If you pay attention, you'll notice a lot of similarities here between the two authors, even though they're separated by about 1200 years, culture, religion, and geography. You can also notice how both thinkers immediately identify the idea of knowing human nature to social organization and political function, on top of moral considerations. It should be noted that human nature is a key component of getting your political theory right. No matter how good the theory is in abstract, if you misidentify human nature, the whole thing collapses in practice. This is because any political structure depends on the behavior of the average person within that system. If your assumption about the average behavior is wrong, everything that rested on that assumption becomes wrong. This is one of the critical issues that led to the communist collapse. Marx had misidentified the base behavior of humans and had built his system on false assumptions of how people would behave, and it's no wonder that the system couldn't last. So let's get started with Xunzi. First, let's identify what Xunzi means by the phrase, human nature is evil. And we need to do this partially because in Chinese language the term evil has a completely different connotation than it does here in the West. So the human part is easy enough to understand, and so is the word is. It simply means to be. But nature in this context refers to the general human predispositions, and that applies to the overwhelming majority of human beings, but not necessarily all of them. Human beings are the kinds of things that have 2 legs and walk upright, but there are people without one or both of their legs and they do not walk upright. These kinds of extreme case exceptions are excluded because Xunzi is focusing on the general meaning here. Evil, we have to remember, does not mean the kind of moral evil that we're used to thinking about. Xunzi is Chinese, and so he's using a definition of evil that is part of the Chinese context, not the Western one. For him, evil means something like subpar performance, wasteful behavior, actions that are not viable in the long run because they're not sustainable and they're not harmonious with the nature of human beings. For a detailed analysis of the term, you can read the article we already covered on China. This idea of evil is always contextual and rarely, if ever, deals in absolutes. Note that good nature would mean something like the instinctual general disposition of an average human being towards acting in a harmonious manner, which would be sustainable and viable in the long term. These actions would not be wasteful, and they would be the optimal decisions in the context of our actions and context of our resources. So why is human nature evil? Xunzi gives us a series of arguments using a number of analogies, historical examples, and logical points, and we'll cover just a few here. First, if human nature was good, there would be no need for laws, for enforcement, or for education, because we would simply do all those kinds of things on our own. And this is because we would inherently and reflexively do the right thing. But as soon as the threat of force by enforcement of law is removed, most people simply go off the chain. In a college setting, you can see this play out across college campuses, when kids find themselves without the sanctioning presence of their parents and suddenly turn into animals. So this means that our nature cannot be good by default. Second, if human nature were good, people could simply be left alone and they would develop into the kinds of individuals that are socially functional and contributing members of society. But we don't even pretend to do that. Instead, we know that we must socialize children into the proper ways of social behavior or they will be permanently off the chain. You have to be taught not to use streets as a toilet, not to bite people, to actually communicate your status to others. That means that we, as a society, mandate that children be trained. And now that training would make no sense if you're naturally disposed to those behaviors. It only makes sense if you would otherwise behave in ways that are contrary to basic social values. So why are we evil? Because the path of evil is the path of least resistance. It is far easier to live for the moment. However, without investment, dedication, and the sacrifice of today for tomorrow, these short-term benefits lead to your own destruction and destruction of society. You can get instant gratification and bliss by consuming any number of drugs, but getting that instant gratification now tends to lead to some not-so-happy future prospects. And the problem with acts of evil is that they're all about instant gratification. That's easy, it's direct, and everyone can by default understand that, even squirrels. But through education, we teach people the concept of investing and sacrificing now and then delaying your gratification until some future time. And we do this because delayed gratification is a way of investing into the future. It's a way of making sure that the future will be stable and orderly because you have prepared for it. Think about it this way. You could spend your entire paycheck on the kinds of things you want right now, and you will be happy right now. But the odds are that this kind of spending will pretty quickly lead to a serious problem. You won't have money left to pay rent, to pay for gas, to pay for food, or something else that's critical. And people get laid off all the time. If you have just one accident, your whole life comes crashing down. If you had saved some portion of your income and not enjoyed it when you earned it, then you would be much better suited to survive the kinds of accidents that life throws at you. And this is why we have education, so that people learn to look beyond their immediate experiences and instant gratification, and instead make sacrifices for their future. A society of stable individuals is likely to be a stable society, and stable societies prevent things like mass death, destruction, and chaos. Finally, your actions today make likely that certain kinds of actions will happen tomorrow. So if you're doing things that are, quote, good by Xunzi's standard, then you change your situation, even if in a barely noticeable manner. And that new situation makes it more likely that you will do even better tomorrow. But if you do poorly today, if you make bad choices, then your situation tomorrow will actually be worse, which means that your odds of making another bad decision go up. The general term for this is called the Pareto distribution, and you might have run into this in your economics or psych classes. It's also called the Matthew principle because the way it works seems to mimic that New Testament line. Quote, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away." That's Matthew 25:29. So you have all seen this idea in action. You make bad choices today, they leave you in a worse place tomorrow, so you make another bad choice trying to climb out of that hole, but that one only makes the situation worse, and so on. So for example, take a person who robs a liquor store today to provide for their kids. But tomorrow they have a problem with the law, so now they definitely can't get a job, which leads them to steal more, which lands them in jail, and then their kids have no provider. Understandably, that first choice seemed like a necessity, but it also started them down this path of collapsing consequences. Now, Xunzi is all about getting these core ideas squared away, and getting a handle on the nature of human nature. If we can do that, it becomes much easier to design the kinds of social systems that will help us establish and maintain functional societies. The thing most people seem to miss is that although human nature is evil, for Xunzi, it has the potential to be improved. And that's the whole reason why writing that article is meaningful from his perspective. If you couldn't do anything about your situation, then what would be the point of talking about it? But Xunzi sees human nature as having a wasteful default setting, but one that has the potential to be extremely productive when properly educated. And that's the good news. The other part of the good news is that moving beyond the wasteful initial position is up to you and the effort you're willing to make. Al-Farabi is a bit trickier to read. Al-Farabi begins by noting that different places on Earth are different in their core composition, which then leads to their conditions being different, which leads to the context of people in those places being different, and that produces different cultures. But for all that diversity, al-Farabi says that human beings are social in a way that we cannot have the perfection of humanity outside of society. Now, obviously, he's using a teleological position here, and not just any society will do. It must be ordered in a specific way, or it will not do its job of allowing its members to become fully human, teleologically again. So we have a political, social aspect right there. And to understand how to properly align humans with that teleological drive, al-Farabi turns to an exploration of reason. He begins by noting that all living things have this kind of bottom-level awareness based on senses and appetites. And you see it in sea slugs, in squirrels, even amoeba are light-sensitive, and the senses are used to drive the creature forward to fulfill its appetites. Next, of those living creatures, some have imagination. And what he means is the ability to formulate a plan of some sort, to picture a future and then take steps towards achieving it. Wolves have hunting tactics, so do whales. Squirrels that see a bird feeder have to come up with a plan of getting at it. Running up the tree makes no sense unless you first came up with a plan to go up the tree, then down the rope, and that seems to lead you to food. So that's the use of imagination for problem solving. At these two levels, al-Farabi says that there is no morality. And that's because creatures that are limited to these two levels are driven by sense and appetites. The creatures who only reach these levels, therefore, cannot be held responsible for their actions. The level above is the level of reason. And this is where humans are located. Reason gives us the ability to ponder, to understand, and so on. Now, every lower system is, of course, integrated into the higher system, so we still have sense and appetite, and we have imagination, but we also go beyond that. The main trick is that, with reason, we're no longer limited to the senses. We get to figure out things like principles, universal laws, and all things that are metaphysical. And because we have both the ability to think and to make choices that are not determined by basic needs, we become morally responsible. So what should we be doing with that reason? Al-Farabi says that our entire job is to be happy. But to do that, we have to aim our entire being at goodness. And by doing so, he says, we are fulfilling our telos and we become as well off as we can possibly be, in the sense of being as human as we can be. So how exactly do we do that? Well, here al-Farabi is in agreement with Xunzi when he says that the only way to be good is to be fully focused on it at all times. As soon as we're not fully focused on good, we will do evil, or rather we will do not good. And that means that evil is our default setting. So what exactly does al-Farabi mean by that? Well, goodness is discoverable only by reason, and this is why it takes reason to be a moral agent. But we have other drives as well, right? The senses and appetites. So if your reason is not guiding your moves, the only other thing there is sense and appetite. In which case, your odds of doing rational, good actions is really low. And even if you did them, you would be doing them as an accident, which would have no moral value. A few other points. Since goodness is all about fulfilling your telos, that is the ultimate source of happiness. Now, how do we know? Because your telos is literally what you're made for. Any other behavior is behavior of something else. Now, you can run around and pretend to be a sea slug, but in that case, you've left just about all of your potential unused. You have fallen short of your telos, and so you're actually less happy than you could have been. So that all means that al-Farabi sets up the system like this. You want happiness. The way you get happiness is by fulfilling your telos. The way you fulfill your telos as a human is by the use of reason, which then tells you what to do. But what about people who want to be evil, you say? What if evil makes them happy? Well, al-Farabi beat you to the punch there, oh hypothetical person asking the question, because reason is universal, meaning that we all have the exact same reason. And happiness is found by the use of reason, and that happiness is based off of human telos, which then just means that there's only one actual happiness. Now, sure, you may have preferences, but those fall under appetites. So your wanting to be evil is an appetite, but your reason leads you to only one happiness, and that is what is actually good. So let's take a look at a short analogy here. Let's say you're driving a car. How do you drive a car well? Well, you have to know where you're going, you have to keep your eyes on the road, and you can't make random decisions that take you away from your destination. The same principle works here. You have to aim at the right kind of goal. You have to make an effort to keep your life, your intentions and actions pointed in that direction. And then you can't make decisions that take you in a different direction. In fact, as soon as you're not driving to your actual destination, you are, by definition, driving somewhere else. And if your job is to drive to the destination, then you're screwing up your job. The same holds true for using reason to aim and to keep yourself properly oriented. Now that should all sound very familiar by now. Here is our hierarchy of values. See that star at the top of the highest moral value? That's the destination. And now you can have whatever sub-hierarchy you want down here, so long as it is pointed in the direction of your highest moral value, and so long as it can rationally be pointed that way. For example, if you have something like help people rise out of poverty as your highest moral value, then you can't rationally have a sub-hierarchy of push people into bankruptcy. And you can't have that because it is in contradiction to your highest moral value. So to do something that is pointing in the opposite direction is clearly the opposite of what you're trying to do. So what's this universal happiness, this goodness? Where exactly do we aim at? Actually, let's explain what it can't be, and then we'll sort of figure out what it must be. So happiness of the kind that al-Farabi is talking about can't be about joy, about the temporary dopamine burst. And also what we aim for can't be physical, like an object. And it can't be something that is limited by the universe. Well, why not? Well, if your happiness was something momentary, material, or limited, then one, it would be external to you. And that means that it may be out of your reach. Now, this also means that the good we seek can't be about the end point. It must be about the process of getting there. If it were about the end point, then you would have to be unhappy your whole life and maybe get to the point of happiness if you're lucky. But this is supposed to be about reason, not about luck, so the process itself must actually make you happy. 2, if this was all about temporary, material, and limited happiness, then it couldn't be guaranteed. And that's because other people can get in the way of your happiness. If you're looking at a material object, it might be in limited supply, or it might be stolen. And not only people could get in your way, the universe itself might. Things like natural disaster, disease, rules of physics, and so on. So anything that depends on others, anything that is out there in the world, cannot be the source of happiness. Anything that is not entirely within your own power can't be it. And finally, anything that is material is inherently limited, and everything that is material is doomed to be lost. If nothing else, entropy ends everything. So, what's left then? Happiness that counts, the way that you should orient your life, is towards things that are permanent, eternal, internal, and immaterial. So permanent, meaning that things are such that once you get them, you will always have them, so you can't lose them. Eternal, meaning that it does not end, because anything that can end, like joy, will eventually disappear. No one has to take it away, but if the thing itself is ephemeral, then it fades, and so your pursuit of that joy goes on forever. Internal, meaning that it depends only on you, not the world, so no one can get in your way of getting it or take it away from you once you have it. And finally, immaterial, simply meaning that it's not limited by the material universe. There's not a lot of those things around. I mean, these goals are only possible in a realm that is beyond the material reality. And this might seem like an overly complex move on the part of al-Farabi, but let's look at that one more time. All material things you may desire are never guaranteed to you. You can't be certain that you will get them or keep them. Even if you could guarantee getting and keeping them, they will still deteriorate and go away. That's how the material universe works. It's called entropy. Since you have to aim and orient your life in any case, you should direct it towards a metaphysical idea, which you kind of have to do anyway when you select your highest moral value. But then you might as well aim for the absolute highest good, right? Don't sell yourself short here. Make the journey as valuable as the destination. Aim for things that are only ever up to you. Now, al-Farabi understands this idea of good to be heaven, the afterlife, and his universal ideas for humanity are just that, an understanding of human nature as having the potential to be of heavenly character, but with the realization that actualizing this potential is difficult. However, notice that this is not just an idea for personal happiness that he's proposing here. Your heavenly nature means a specific kind of mental effort that you make, which means a specific kind of an individual you become, which means a specific kind of society that you aim for while you are here, and that means a specific kind of life for humanity as a whole, ultimately speaking. The idea of human nature, just like in every other theory we've looked at, is the basis for all things, understanding what they are and how they should be. The same metaphysical ideas that drive both Xunzi, a Confucian, also drive al-Farabi, a Muslim, and this is in addition to over a millennium of time separation, entirely different contexts, cultures, and so on. And this tells you that the idea of human nature is an absolutely abstract basis for understanding reality, because it is entirely context independent. Looking back on the idea of ethics, you can see how different societies could arrive at very similar ideas regarding moral values, so long as their ideas about what a human being is were close enough. And with all that in mind, we turn next to the section on society. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below or shoot me an email. Thank you.